for analysis, let's go to Bob Ward in Dubai. He's a Policy and Communications Director at Grantham Research Institute on climate change and environment. Thanks very much for joining us on the show,
Hello.
Bob. Now, just picking up from where that report ended, there's been widespread outrage that a record number of fossil fuel lobbyists have been able to access Cop28. What does that indicate? Could it mean that the pledges are influenced or compromised in any way?
Well, I think it's a recognition of the fact, first of all, that the COP is taking place in a region that relies very heavily on oil and gas production at the moment for the economy. But also it's well known that we could have, for the very first time, emerging from one of these UN climate summits, language that explicitly calls for a phase out and commits countries to a phase out of all fossil fuels. We had language emerged from the Cop26 2 years ago that was held in Glasgow around phasing down the use of coal, but this could be the first time that we have language that includes oil and gas. And I think that there are lobbyists here who will want to water that down, but I think that they're going to have it, not going to succeed. I think there are too many countries here that recognize that as much as you can have a commitment to increasing renewable energy, which we've seen several countries sign up to, you also have to have a commitment to phasing down fossil fuels, because the use of fossil fuels is the primary driver of climate change.
Sultan Al Jaber, who's the state oil CEO, said the phase out of fossil fuels would take the world back into the caves. What is he basing this on? Is this sort of reflective of the comments that are indicative of wider pushback, do you think?
Well, Dr. Al-Jaber, he has already made clear, leading up to this summit, that there has to be a phase out of fossil fuels. What there is a discussion about is how quickly, and he points out that if you do this too quickly, it could lead to a lowering of living standards in some parts of the world. If you phase out fossil fuels more quickly, then you can phase in the alternatives. But I think he lost his temper in a press interview, and he made these comments about going back to caves if we phase out fossil fuels. I don't think the science supports that, and I don't think that's actually what he thinks. What happened was that the COP president has long, hard days here at the COP where they're trying to bring together 197 countries. He's under a lot of pressure. He's probably not getting very much sleep. And I think he lost his temper and he said something that he didn't really mean. Right. So we will see, I think, Dr. Al-Jaber drive countries towards an agreement around the language for a phase out of fossil fuels. And I think that will be a major success if we can get it. But it's not by no means assured yet. There's still more than a week of negotiation to go on. And we know from the past experience that anything can happen.
Scientists say greenhouse gas emissions must be cut by 43% by 2030 if the world is to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, current trajectory suggests greenhouse gas emissions will actually rise by 9% by 2030. Central to these talks, of course, is cutting fossil fuels, and that's what's central to dropping these temperatures. How much of a drastic shift has to happen in terms of reaching this Paris Climate Accord deal?
Well, the science is completely clear about this. You have to cut global emissions of greenhouse gases effectively to zero in order to stop climate change. And the world is seeing mounting impacts affecting lives and livelihoods across many, many countries through changes in extreme weather, more intense storms, more intense and frequent heat waves, droughts, floods, rising sea levels that are causing more coastal flooding. The mounting toll of climate change, I think, is something that nobody can deny. And we know that you have to get emissions down to net zero to stop it. The sooner we do that, the lower the temperature, the longer it takes to get to net zero, the higher the temperature and the bigger the impact. So it couldn't be clearer. And as you say, current commitments made by countries collectively are nowhere near enough to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees above its pre-industrial level, which is what most countries have agreed to do. we've already seen temperatures this year probably get very close to 1.5 degrees, and beyond 1.5 degrees, the science shows that the impacts become very much more difficult to bear, and we risk crossing major thresholds in the climate system that could, for instance, lead to the destabilization of the land-based ice sheets in West Antarctica and in Greenland, which together hold enough ice to raise global sea level by about 13 meters, which would be absolutely disastrous for the world. And although it wouldn't happen overnight, we would be committed to it happening, and it would literally redraw the map of the world if we get to that point. So the stakes could not be clearer, and it could not be clearer that what we have to do is get our emissions down to net zero, and that means a massive cut in our use of fossil fuels quickly and at scale.
Well, let's hope the pledges reflect that from this COP28. Bob Ward, Policy and Communications Director at Grantham Research Institute.